Hello and welcome to Lesson 3, which we will be looking at the behavioural approach to explaining phobias. Now, a phobia is a disorder in which a fearful anxiety occurs in response to a specific object or a situation. Although it may be acceptable and sometimes even sensible to show a fear reaction in a threatening situation, the phobic person shows a marked and persistent fear out of all proportion to the actual danger posed by the situation. Now, psychologically, symptoms may include feelings of restlessness and dread, difficulty with concentration and irritability. Physical symptoms include shortness of breath, nausea, shaking, trembling, headaches and palpitations, and muscle tension. These symptoms are so unpleasant that sufferers attempt to avoid the object or the situation at all costs. This is the part of the syllabus that we'll be looking at today. This lesson is about explaining the phobias, and next lesson will be about treating phobias. So by the end of this video, you should know what the two-process model is, including classical and operant conditioning. You should already know what they are, but this should explain how it relates to a phobia. So some of those words that you should remember from when you did behaviourism in the approaches section. Hopefully we can all remember classical conditioning and the work of Pavlov, and also operant conditioning, Skinner, who talked very much about positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. If at this point you feel you need to have a recap, then I suggest getting your notes back out and just having a quick read through about the behavioural approach to psychology. Okay, there are different types of phobias that you might have. So one type of phobia might be a social phobia. So sufferers experience inappropriate anxiety in social situations. So it could be in a restaurant, in a meeting, anywhere where there's lots of people, and just thinking about them can cause anxiety. Another one is agoraphobia. So sufferers are anxious when they are in a situation that they cannot leave, especially in an open space or a big crowd. They therefore avoid these situations which make them very anxious. And then you can also have a specific phobia, so anything could be like animal examples such as rats or spiders, could be heights, it could be water. There could be some more random ones such as clowns or possibly balloons and things like that, which people have learnt from when they were a child. There are a few other ones which I wonder if you can research and come back to your lesson and tell us the answer. So if you have a phobia of a beard, for instance, what would your phobia be called? And the second one, if you have a phobia of the snow, can you find out what those ones are and let us know? Okay, now there was a famous study that was carried out, and that was by Watson and Rayner, and this was done in 1920 when they conditioned little Albert, a young baby, to fear a white rat. Now, if you go onto YouTube, you'll be able to watch clips of little Albert. It is 1920, so don't expect HD video or anything, but you should be able to get the gist of what's going on. You also have the information in your guide notes as well. So if you do that now, just to get yourself equipped on what actually happened. Okay, so little Albert then was classically conditioned so that every time he saw a rat, a white rat, a loud noise would happen behind his head. And when that did happen, it obviously made him cry. Now, when that first appeared, the rat would have been a neutral stimulus, so little Albert wouldn't have been afraid of it. But after the classical conditioning happened, every time he saw that white rat, he associated it with the bang, and therefore his conditioned response was to become upset. Now they actually then generalised that, and so it became anything white. So little Albert then became afraid of anything white, created this fear response. Okay, now what you do need to know about is the two-process model. Now we've already explained about classical conditioning, and that is the first stage, and that's how a phobia actually begins. Now the second phase would be the operant conditioning part. So this is where avoidance of fear is rewarding, so therefore your phobia continues and is maintained in this way. So the likelihood of behaviour being repeated is increased if the outcome is rewarding. So in the case of a phobia, the avoidance of the phobic stimulus reduces the fear and therefore is reinforcement. So an example of negative reinforcement, for instance, would be the individual avoids the anxiety created by, for example, a dog or a social situation, and so therefore they avoid that place entirely. So that maintains the phobia and keeps it going. Now the third explanation to explain phobias could be from social learning. This isn't part of the two-way process, but you do need to make sure you know it as well. Now, phobias may be acquired through modelling the behaviour of others. For example, if you see a parent respond to a spider with extreme fear, it may lead a child to acquire the same behaviour. Have any of you got the same fears, for instance, as what your parents have got because you've seen them acting in a particular way? Okay, to show this in action then, we have the phobia of balloons, so globophobia. Now, the unconditioned stimulus would be a loud noise when that balloon pops, and so the unconditioned response is anxiety. So to start with, the balloon starts as a neutral stimulus, but because people get used to that loud noise, then it creates anxiety. So a conditioned response is then that they have a fear of those balloons, and that just seeing a balloon can create anxiety for them. Now that can be maintained because they make sure that they avoid balloons and locations. There are children who won't go to children's parties because they know there'll be a balloon there, and they've got such a fear from such a young age that they might see one, and then obviously it increases their anxiety. So people would avoid putting themselves in situations to make sure that they don't have that anxiety, and that phobia is maintained because of that. Okay, so we need to look at some evaluation points. Now, classical conditioning does have some importance. People with phobias often do recall a specific incident when their phobia appeared. For example, if you were bitten by a dog or you experienced a panic attack in a social situation, you may remember it. But not everyone who has a phobia can recall such an incident. It is possible that such traumatic incidents did happen, but because they were so traumatic, you may have forgotten them. Now, Su et al. Also suggests that different phobias may be the result of different processes. For example, agoraphobics were most likely to explain their disorder in terms of a specific incident, whereas arachnophobics, people who are scared of spiders, were most likely to cite modelling as the cause, so therefore social learning. The second evaluation point is the Diathesis-stress model. So according to the two-process model of phobias, an association between a neutral stimulus and a fearful experience will result in a phobia. However, researchers found, for example, that not everyone who is bitten by a dog develops a phobia of dogs. This could be explained by the Diathesis-stress model, which proposes that we inherit a genetic vulnerability for developing mental disorders. However, a disorder will only manifest itself if triggered by a life event, such as being bitten by a dog. So a dog bite would only lead to a phobia in those people who have such a vulnerability. Now, there is support for social learning. An experiment by Behavioural et al. Supported the social learning explanation. In the experiment, a model acted as if he was in pain every time a buzzer sounded. Later on, those participants who had observed this showed an emotional reaction to the buzzer, demonstrating an acquired fear response. Another evaluation point is biological preparedness. The fact that phobias do not always develop after a traumatic incident may be explained in terms of biological preparedness. Martin Seligman argued that animals, including humans, are genetically programmed to rapidly learn an association between potentially life-threatening stimuli and fear. These stimuli are referred to as ancient fears, so things that would have been dangerous in the past, so anything like snakes or heights or strangers, and it would have been adaptive to rapidly learn to avoid such stimuli. Now the thing is, in this day and age, modern objects such as toasters or cars that are much more of a threat than are much less of a threat than spiders. So therefore, these items are not dangerous like they have been in our evolutionary past, like an ancient fear. Now, This has been tested by Bregman, and he failed to condition a fear response in infants aged 8 to 16 months when he paired a loud bell with wooden blocks. It may be that fear responses are only learned with living animals and link with ancient fears. This suggests that behavioural explanations alone cannot be used to explain the development of phobias. And the last point is one that comes up very often when you're talking about different approaches, that you can criticise one approach against the other. So there are cognitive aspects to phobias that cannot be explained in a traditional behaviourist framework. For example, a person in a lift may think, I could become trapped here and suffocate, which is an irrational thought. Such thoughts create extreme anxiety and may trigger a phobia.